Rolling. All right. So Lee, you want
Are we
to lead us
rolling?
off?
Certainly. I'm Lee Hunter, and I've been privileged to be on this St. Luke's Health Initiatives Board for...
I'm going to stop you
Yep.
there. I'm going to have you start one more time, please. For
Okay.
sound.
Okay.
Go ahead. And you're not looking at
So
me
it's
at
not
all.
good morning or good evening or anything. It's
No,
just...
and you're not looking at him. You're looking at me.
Okay.
Roger
all right.
who?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I'm Lee Hunter. I've been privileged to be on this board for 25 years, I think it is. And I started with the hospital board. And I've thought a lot about what has been our measure of success here at SLHI. And I think the key word that comes to my mind is quality. We began at the hospital with concern for quality of care. Quality of services that we provided at the medical center, behavioral health, and in Tempe as well. And so I think that translated then into the fact that we had quality people. I've never known a group of people who were so committed, so caring, and so intelligent, who wanted to do the very best for our community. And so the people, I think, then in turn, as we sold the hospital and came to understand that we had a very unique opportunity with the funds we had available, that we needed to make the right decisions. And one of the first decisions that I think we made was to realize that we didn't know this business of giving money away. We were typically in the business of making money and providing services. And so I think it was key for us to bring in someone who had come from that field. And obviously, Roger Hughes had that experience. And so it was helpful for him to come in and for us to learn together. I think the next aspect of quality that came through was our process, because we all approached it from a learning perspective. When we first began the Community Grants Committee, and I ultimately chaired that, and I think that's where we began to form our values and figure out where we wanted to go, what we wanted to do. And there was argument, there was, disagreement.
Absolutely.
There were votes that everybody didn't always win. I lost.
Me too.
Several times. But the conversation was what was so unique, because it took us to a different place, didn't it?
It did, indeed.
And so I think quality really sums it up for me in terms of quality of care and service, in that we want to provide that quality of service for the community, quality of people, and quality of conversation. I've never witnessed such wonderful conversation as what we've had. And having gone off the board, I miss it very much. I miss everyone dearly. But I think we have set the background, or set the stage now for the future. And I'm very excited to see where it's going to go.
So Lee, you talked about in the grants committee, that
Yes.
first grants committee, that's where the values really started to come out.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to some of the values that came out and that still stand out to you today?
Well, one of the values was that we wanted to, it was complicated, because we obviously had designated funds. And so a portion of those funds then went to direct care. And I think the mission from the hospital really reinforced that. So I think we were very comfortable with that. But on the other hand, we wanted to use the funds in such a way that, as they say, you don't want to give someone something, you want to teach them how to do for themselves. And that really, I think, was the key value that we began to understand. Instead of the vans, We wanted to give people a way to explore transportation issues on their own, or for them to come up with ideas on their own. So I think it was, how can people learn and help themselves versus us just imparting to them?
Very nice, thank you. Would you say that among those experiences in the grants committee that really was, you said that was kind of the place where the culture of SLHI was forged. If you were talking to a new board member coming on the board today, what would you really want to emphasize?
Well, I would certainly emphasize them being a part of some conversation in a committee meeting, get to committee meetings, because that's where the real conversation occurs. And don't be afraid to speak up. I was afraid to speak up many times, because I knew I was going to be on the losing end of things. But I think perhaps my comments may have had an impact in other ways. And so don't be afraid to speak up, but go to those committee meetings and listen and share your thoughts.
And as these new board members come in who have no clue
Uh-huh.
about how this, or I mean, of course they know on paper the story, but they didn't live the story of the conversion. What would you ask them to be mindful of regarding the history?
I would ask them to be mindful of quality, that whatever it is they seek to do, that it be the very best possible, and to not settle for less. I think that we looked for the best community organizations to do the work, and so at the same time, I'm going to contradict myself, as we do on the board.
Yes, we do.
And that is not to be afraid to take a risk either. Someone new that's coming in who's got a great idea, I would say give that a shot as well. So balance it somewhat with bringing in the very best and then taking a risk as well with those who seem so committed. And I think that's what I would look for.
Excellent, excellent. Judith, speaking of quality,
Speaking of
you
quality,
played a huge role in the determination of SLHI's brand and position. Can you talk a little bit about how that transpired and your role in it
Yes.
and the importance of some of the things that you did there?
well, I first want to say, as Lee did, that it was a great honor and privilege to be on the board. And as the hospital morphed from being a hospital into a nonprofit foundation, we had a great many decisions to make. Lee mentioned some, new executive director, deciding what grants we would make and how much of the corpus we would spend each year. As we made these major decisions, we had the opportunity to move on to other things, such as establishing a mission statement. Now, I had a professor in college who said, a mission statement should be no more than 6 words. It should fit on the front of a T-shirt, and if one to be stuck in an elevator with someone who said, "What does SLH do?" they could say, in 6 words, the essence of what we were about before that elevator hit the ground floor. Crafting a mission statement is kind of like doing a jigsaw puzzle. You have to get all the words to fit together perfectly.
Why don't we back that up to crafting, okay? Crafting a mission statement so that we can take the whole piece.
No touching the paper.
You're fine, you're fine.
Okay. Crafting a mission statement is almost like doing a jigsaw puzzle. You have to get all the pieces to fit together. After much, sometimes heated discussion, the consensus was the words community health had to be included. But we needed another word to tie it all together. A great many words flew around that conference room, And one of the suggestions was the word catalyst. Oh no, we can't use that word. It's scientific. It has nothing to do with healthcare. So that night I went home, I looked in my dictionary, and lo and behold found that catalyst could also mean to precipitate change. So indeed we could include the word catalyst in the mission statement to inspire change, to motivate growth, and
Sorry, we gotta stop. We gotta fix this.
Stand by, and we are rolling.
crafting a mission statement is almost like solving a jigsaw puzzle. You have to get all the pieces to fit together. After much and sometimes heated discussion, the consensus was the words community health would be an integral part. But we needed one more word to tie it all together. And words flew around the conference room, and someone suggested the word catalyst. Oh, no, we can't use that because it's a scientific term. It's nothing to do with healthcare. That night I went home and I looked up catalyst in my dictionary, and lo and behold found that it can mean someone or something that precipitates change. So indeed we could use catalyst in the mission statement to inspire change, to promote growth, and motivate others to achieve better outcomes. Sorry. The final mission statement of St. Luke's Health Initiatives read, "A catalyst for community health," and that said it all.
Excellent, thank you. So Judith,
Hmm?
what about future board members? What would you say to them about what they need to be mindful of?
Future board members need to talk to those who have been on the board for some time to gain a background that will help their learning curve. They should commit to doing a full-fledged job for the board and immerse themselves, as Lee said, in committees, and do not be afraid to speak up. I found that I often spoke up and got knocked down, but you know what? I hoped that somebody was listening and I might just alter a decision or help them to see things from a new light.
Okay, we're rolling again.
All right, so Judith, in terms of future board members, if you were sitting across from one right now, what advice would you give them?
I would suggest that they pair with a member who'd been on the board longer and learn as much about the history of the organization as possible to give them a foundation to continue. I would also suggest, as Lee mentioned, that they speak up. I did that quite often, got knocked down a few times, but I felt like I was adding to the conversation by presenting viewpoints that might otherwise not be heard, and to help others perhaps to expand their viewpoint on what was going on.
Lee mentioned quality as one of the key words that she would want future board members and the current organization to be mindful of. If you were to think about another key word related to the culture of SLHI that you'd like people to remember and keep in mind as we do our work, what would it be?
I think commitment would be my first selection. If you're not wholly committed to the organization for whom you have been selected to sit on a board, they're not going to get the full benefit that you have to offer, and you are not going to get the complete benefit of the organization.
Excellent, thank you. Lee, you want to talk to me?
I think I'd add to that, too, a commitment to learning. To not feel that a board member has to know everything, but is willing to learn and to take some risks. The other thought I just had as we were talking is that there are opportunities for board members to attend events in the community. The Board of Visitors and Honkachina and events like that. And I urge new board members to do that because that presents an opportunity to form a personal relationship with one another, to spend time with one another outside of the boardroom. And I think that's what made us close as an initial board, is that we had spent time together in hospital retreats and other activities such as these events.
Yes.
And so we formed that personal relationship, and I would hope that new board members would take advantage of those opportunities, because not only do they touch your heart when you attend those events, but you also come to appreciate each other. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to do that, don't you?
I do, and plus it gets you out into the community so people know who you are and what the tagline says we're doing.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, are there any questions that we didn't ask or anything that you'd like to say more?
Well, I could say one thing. I think Judith is being modest when she said somebody tossed out the word catalyst. It was Judith who tossed out that very important word. And we had some incredible discussion about that word with other board members. But it really set the tone, I think, for us. And it was a very important decision that we made. And Judith, you played an incredible role in that decision, and in many other ways as well. On the Finance Committee, she was pretty amazing as well. She knows more about that than I could ever hope to. But anyway, it's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure to serve with her and with all of the board members.
It was.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just a wonderful
good
experience.
friendships.
It certainly did. Thank you for.
Fantastic. I can't tell you how resonant that word still is.
You can cut the part about Judith saying the word.
No. Please don't. Please don't cut that part.
And not the Board of Visitors.
So
You got the Board of Visitors down?
you got to pretend like.
No, I don't. So actually both.
Because
Can I have a water so I can stick it down here?
the
maybe?
Behavioral
You
Health
got one.
Center
Is that yours?
Oh, I
is
do. Thank you.
the St. Luke's Board of Visitors Behavioral Health.
So let's go from what we were just talking about. We had this St. Luke's health system, and there's a long history to that. Can you kind of talk a little bit about where the hospital started, how it came to be in Arizona?
Well, originally, I believe it was 1907, Bishop Atwood established a facility for the care of patients with tuberculosis. And for a number of years, this, as far as I can tell, was one of the premier places in Arizona to treat tuberculosis. This was called St. Luke's, ultimately became St. Luke's Hospital, and then became St. Luke's Medical Center. And the organization increased and improved and became one of the flagship organizations to provide medical care in the state of Arizona. It, in its development, was associated with a number of volunteer organizations. And the volunteer organizations that arose were, number one, an organization called the St. Luke's Board of Visitors. It was a long time ago, and a number of people that I would have used for authority are no longer easily available. But as I understand it, the Episcopal Church, which was, I believe, on the grounds of where St. Luke's Medical Center is, or at least very close, had among its parishioners a number of people, usually ladies, who visited patients in the hospital. A number of these ladies were also wives of physicians, but they became the St. Luke's Board of Visitors. And that has remained an organization that has been well known throughout the area and has done many charitable things. As a matter of fact, in the doctor's opinion, I think their crowning glory was the establishment of the St. Luke's Board of Visitors Behavioral Health Center at St. Luke's Medical Center a number of years ago. Another organization that came from St. Luke's was an organization originally of younger men who were called the Luke's Men. And this was a group that was originally formed to promote volunteerism, to support the hospital, and I think it was also sort of a feeding ground for younger businessmen who might participate in board activities and maybe arise to the board of St. Luke's Medical Center. And this organization provided support for the hospital. It ultimately established an award system awarding volunteers across the state of Arizona. This, in conjunction originally with Channel 12, was called the 12 Who Care Hone Kachina Awards. For a number of years, it was televised live on, I believe it was a Friday evening in the fall. We, those of us who were Luke's Men, had a...
Bob?
We're gonna have you put down the book, please, if we could.
Oh, it's
We are
flashing.
picking up
Yeah.
Okay.
the sound from the papers that you're tapping.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. Even this one?
It's a damn good microphone.
Okay. If I have to, I'll hold these very quietly.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Don't make me tell my Cyndi Lauper story. All right, so I'm going to have you roll back to the creation, to the Luke's Men and the evolution of the Luke's Men.
From its beginning or
So
from...
right from the point you finished the Board of Visitors, I gotta have you start over again.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
There was another organization that was formed by St. Luke's, and it was an organization of volunteers which was ultimately called the Luke's Men. And the Luke's Men was an organization of usually young, less than 40 years of age, businessmen in the Phoenix area, to support the hospital and its activities and to support volunteerism. I believe it was also going to be used as a feeding ground for potential board members for the hospital and ultimately the health system. It got involved with supporting the hospital with any ways that it could. It ran golf tournaments for the physicians, and it also devised an event called the 12 Who Care Hone Kachina Awards. And this was in conjunction with Channel 12. I think that's probably why it was 12 Who Care, and was televised yearly in the fall, live, and honored 12 volunteers across the state of Arizona. It ultimately was felt to be something that was in the best interest of both Channel 12 and also the Luke's Men, and at one point in time it was decided that the organizations were best served if Channel 12 had its volunteer recognition awards and the Luke's Men had their recognition awards. We who were Luke's Men preferred to honor individuals and not really organizations, and I think there was a push to honor organizations from the Channel 12 and from the NBC. So we did split, and the Luke's Men carry on with the Hone Kachina Awards, and I believe Channel 12 still carries on with the 12 Who Care Awards. The Luke's Men, in its evolution, decided that maybe it shouldn't just be Luke's Men, and it has developed into what's called the Hone Kachina Council. There are now a number of ladies on the Hone Kachina Council, and we can continue to provide the Hone Kachina Awards on an annual basis, honoring volunteers across the state of Arizona. And it is a black tie event and hopefully will remain one, and it is a delightful event to go to.
So, Bob Posner, if I have this correctly, you have direct familial ties to those tuberculosis tents, is that correct?
Well, I have our family doctor. I'm a native Tucsonan, and our family doctor was trained in Maryland but was interested in pulmonary medicine. And so in those days, 1905, He looked at the map, and he knew that the doctors were sending their pulmonary cases, as Cash would well know, out west because they couldn't do anything for him. And so he came to Arizona in 1905 and opened up a practice in Bisbee, Arizona. And there was a small tuberculosis hospital there, Cash, that he used, and then eventually came to, I believe, Tucson, where I was born and raised and delivered by him in 1912. I'm not quite that old, but that's when he came. And then my grandfather moved there from LA with my asthmatic grandmother. He initially had been in Phoenix in 1905 to paint signs for the Arizona Territorial Fair, and said, hey, this is a pretty nice city. And eventually, Lord knows how he did it, he brought over his family with 7 children, came to Tucson, opened up the Posner Art Supply and Sign Shop, which has just celebrated its 100th anniversary with new owners, but same name. And that's where I was born in 1938. What's of interest there is that there was no medical school here when I was ready to go. I had done my pre-med at the University of Arizona, and the med school now that was down there, or is down there, it was about 6 blocks from me where I live, but I had to go out of state. But eventually, when the time came to choose a residency position, I was given the name of Ron Barnett, who is an ophthalmologist that Cash knows well. Used to rent a helicopter and fly his team after doing 10 cataracts in Sun City to St. Luke's, and did 10 cataracts at St. Luke's in the afternoon, which was amazing. And I called him because we were fraternity brothers at U of A, and he said, there's a guy in Phoenix by the name of Bob Barnes. Now, I was interested in going back to Tucson, but once I met Bob Barnes in the Behavioral Health Center and saw what they were doing in Phoenix, I said, well, maybe I'll have to give up some of my Southern Arizona resentment towards Phoenix and consider that, and I did. And I came here in the mid-'70s. In fact, Mike Powers and I both came in 1977. At that time, Bob Barnes was starting up a pain and stress reduction unit. Talk about being way ahead of your times. No one cared about chronic, intractable, non-malignant pain. And he was setting up that unit, as was Ray Huger, a physician at St. Joe's, right across the street. Both of them were way ahead of their times, both psychiatrists. And I was interested in consultation liaison type work anyway. So I came out here and I joined him. And at that time, he told me that Phoenix, because of the way mental health had been introduced to the residents of the state, supported the psychiatric community 1/2 of the size that Denver had. And the reason was, he had done his residency up there, the reason was that Denver had the medical school there, and the chairman of the department was very good at presenting mental health issues to the community. In Arizona, we had, when I was in 6th grade, the chastisement of teachers, if you can believe this, saying to kids that misbehaved, if you don't watch it, you're going to end up at 24th and Van Buren. And I must admit, we all looked at each other. We didn't know what that meant or where it was, but it was the Arizona State Hospital. At that time, it was on the outskirts of town. And then, of course, Winnie Ruth Judd came along, and the whole situation there was just extremely traumatic. She was eventually convicted of being the trunk murderess and sending the trunk to LA and all this. There is a book by Jana Bommersbach that you can read on that, and I'm going to donate it to our library here. But when we were trick-or-treating, I remember my parents, even when I was a little older, saying, well, you better get back before the sun goes down. Winnie Ruth Judd may break out. And she always used to walk away because she had been at the hospital 6.5 years and basically turned out to be one of their best volunteers. And so this was the mentality we had and what we had to deal with in trying to get behavioral health off the ground. Who were the pioneers and the people that did that? It was people like Brian Lockwood, getting together and bringing out Bob Barnes, who helped develop a behavioral health center, which eventually had adult psychiatry, child psychiatry, a very strong substance abuse program run by Don Damstra. And then Bob decided that pain and stress reduction was something that ought to be addressed. And I'm sure he and Ray Huger talked about it, and they each started their programs.
So, Cash, this hospital that was so clearly ahead of its time on a number of aspects, came to a decision point via its board to make the sale happen and to make the conversion that became St. Luke's Health Initiatives. Can you kind of share some of your remembrances about that time period of the conversion, what happened, how it came to be?
Well, it was, I fortunately happened to be chief of staff during that year. And it was an agonizing process. I spent at times 30 hours a week in meetings trying to determine whether or not we were going to have the cash flow to keep the place open. There were discussions about do we cut down on services and try to stay alive as long as we can? Do we provide the services to the absolute best ability that we have and run out of money? How do we get this organization to function, and is there any way possible that we can preserve the organization? One year we did not pay the interest on the bonds that supported the institution, and although there was an escrow account in case we wouldn't pay those, we were taken to court because we hadn't paid, and an agonizing year in and out of meetings and in and out of threats from people who held the notes was very difficult. It ended up that through the efforts of Bill Murray and many others, we made a turnaround system of the year nationally with basically not paying the interest on those bonds for a year. We were then in a position to say, do we do this all over again, or is there a better way to proceed? Through many negotiations, some of which I was involved in and many of which I was not, it was decided that there was a potential buyer, that we could preserve a tremendous amount of capital, that we could sell the organization and come up with monies that could be used for the same general purposes as far as supporting healthcare, and we all decided with a lot of anguish that this was the way we should proceed, and this is the way the people who came before us would have wanted us to proceed. So the organization was sold, the bricks and mortar. The monies that were derived from that were kept, and we formed a foundation that would march on from the owning of hospitals to proceed with providing or helping to provide health care for the area.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but I want to ask both of you, amidst all that chaos, amidst all that trauma that was that decision, I'm going to guess there were at least a couple of either inappropriately funny or actually funny moments. Do you recall any?
I found that an interesting question, John. My first response to that was because we were meeting weekly in addition to all the clinical responsibilities, and I was, I believe, for part of that time, the chief of the Behavioral Health Center, chief of staff. It was just grueling. And so I could think of nothing funny. And of course, in the early conversion years, as I said to you outside, we ended up with all this money, and what did we know about that? We knew about direct medical assistance. We knew about access to care. We knew a little bit about grants. We didn't know how to make them too well. I was on the grants committee. And we felt like we were automobile salespeople. We got a bunch of vans because we felt that patient access was pretty important. We had to get the patients to care. But maybe in retrospect, what's funny is that Martha Taylor Thomas and I were talking at the last retreat during one of the breaks, and Roy happened to be there listening, thankfully. And she had said to me, she may bring this up herself today, that this is a happy experience, I guess. She said, the three most challenging and exciting moments for me in my life were, number one, getting married, number two, having a child, and number three, being at that meeting, running it with Bill Murray in Boston with all these bankers and people that were scared to death. And I set a rule, she said, before I started, that I have a little folder here. If I don't think that we're making progress, I'm going to just push it forward, and this meeting is over. And you have to remember, we had the money. We just weren't going to pay them. So Martha told me that, and she said, lo and behold, it came to the point that I pushed that forward. And she says, boy, that was a challenging moment when you think about all the pressures of that situation. So I'm not sure that's funny, but Roy heard that, and he said, as we discussed it a little further, that I said, gee, the new board members ought to know about this. And if we could get Martha and Bill Murray together and be videoed, which I also thought the retreat should have been videoed, this would be wonderful for orientation. And so that's, I guess, why we're here.
So there's more that came out of that chaos, clearly, which was the original board of this organization. How do you feel like those experiences from the conversion informed the creation of this organization's culture? Cash?
Well, I think we were, and the new board is a process that is forming. And I hope that we will, and you will always continue to be a formation type process. You will evolve. We didn't know what to do, although we knew that we wanted to do good. And we wanted to assist with preservation and improvement of health in the area. And I think that those of us who came from the hospital itself had a view of health that is no longer, I think, the proper view of health. We had too narrow horizons, and we knew about disease. And as I've said at many of the board meetings, I am not a healthcare provider. I am a disease care provider. I've never been trained on how to make people healthy. I try to treat their disease and make them feel better. And we have evolved to the point that we are really thinking about health, and we are trying to make people stay healthy, remain healthy, grow up healthy. And that's a real transformation in knowledge. I think one piece of information that I think all new board members should know is that when the hospital was sold, there were a number of people who felt betrayed. And the greatest group who felt betrayed was the group that I represented and that Bob represented, the doctors. Because right or wrong, the doctors felt they put their patients in the hospital. The hospital made money from the patients, and it was therefore the doctor's money that was being used by this new organization. And I am sure that Bob had the same thing happen. I had more than one physician come up to me and say, all right, you've sold my hospital. You better not let anything happen to that money that I and my patients provided. And I think looking back, all of us, doctors and non-doctors, have been very diligent at preserving what we have, making what we have larger, and really proceeding with true, or at least toward true healthcare.
To sort of follow up on that, There were other people that thought they had the money coming to them. Sort of like they say, where there's a will, there's relatives. Well, in this case, where there was money, there was the bishop. And the bishop on our board that we had in at least 2002, he felt that the money should go to the church. And so there was that pressure too. You remember that well. And so we had the money. We had lots of people that were disappointed. St. Luke's was a wonderful institution because we had a subspecialty medical hospital where I could get Cash Beechler or Mike Powers to walk over and do a consult on one of my patients. He just had to walk down the hall. And I would take care of the psychosis. He would take care of the medical part. And that was great backup. So we had that interaction there. But the doctors were unhappy, the bishop was unhappy, and we had to learn what it meant to be a board. And that's where Roger Hughes came in. From my perspective, he was very oriented towards doing work with behavioral health initiatives, and he wrote some position papers. He had Dr. Bill Bonfield, who was one of our chief of staffs, write a paper on care for the indigent. He had had experience in that. And he and Bob Barnes had tried very hard to get the behavioral health unit to continue and to help with the hospital at that times. And I'm looking at a plaque here that says St. Luke's Health Initiatives. I think, Cash, weren't we initially called St. Luke's Health Trust?
Yes.
Okay, so we were called St. Luke's Health Trust. That shows how much we knew
Charitable
about.
Health Trust.
Charitable Health Trust. Then we decided, well, that name's not exactly what we're doing. So some people wanted to drop St. Luke's because they said, we're not just St. Luke's anymore. And they would look at Mike Powers, Cash, and me and say, just because you're physicians there, we're bigger than that. And it even got to the point that some people wanted to drop St. Luke's from our name. Remember, there's a major fight over that. Major. Eventually, we just started, we decided on the St. Luke's Health Initiative and initiatives, and it stayed. But in 2002, our mission statement was a catalyst for community health. And the mission statement read, to improve the health of people and their communities in Arizona, the whole state. We usually focus on Maricopa here and forget northern and southern Arizona a little bit, with an emphasis on vulnerable populations and building the capacity, TAP, of communities to help themselves. And so this attitude was very helpful. And remember, it wasn't just St. Luke's. We had Tempe St. Luke's. And one of the members of the board in 2002, Cash will remember him, was Kent Layton. And Kent Layton would always say, you know, if people aren't eating, we can either give them a fish, or if there's fish in a river in front of their home, we can teach them how to fish. And now I think of Elizabeth's and Jane's gardens that we have. We've just taken the issue, obviously, of healthy eating and active living, and we're providing that. It was the same idea, to help people be, in those years it was called perseverance, to be as independent as they could. Now the new term is resilience. It's the same thing, though. So that's why I think it's so important to get the history for new board members, because if you don't study the history, sometimes you may make some mistakes that could be avoided, and you don't realize that sometimes things don't change that much. It's just called something different. It's the same idea.
So I just want to circle back. I think you've said it already, but I want to see just one more question about this. We've made this transition from curing disease to focusing on health. As members of the original hospital staff and board. Talk about how that feels to you. Bob, you kind of said it's all the same thing.
No, that's
Okay.
not the same thing. I'm talking about many of the projects that we have now were thought about by us, but no, it's not the same thing at all. As Cash said, we were disease-oriented, and now we had to become community health-oriented, and that involved wellness. I happen to have had a degree in health services administration, which I never really used, but then all of a sudden I started thinking a little broader. It took us a while, though. You know, we were docs, and yeah, we could give out money to the Tyson Fund, which was there for substance abuse issues, and the Felton Fund, which is there for, eye issues. But we had to rise above that and think outside the box, which is what we eventually did, and see if we couldn't do something more. And that's where I think we made a major transition that brought the Health Initiative St. Luke's board along.
So based on that evolution, based on what you all went through as a conversion board, if instead of me sitting here, you were sitting here talking to a new board member, what would you want to impart to them?
Number one, I'd have him read the book about Winnie Ruth Judd, the axe murderess, although now you don't read anymore, but he could get it, or she could get it on their Kindles. The pictures won't be as good. Number two, I would have them look at these videos. I don't know what excerpts you're going to pull out, but maybe in some areas they might want to look at the whole video at different times. And I think that number three, be aware that a lot of what they're doing, your high-tech stuff and your websites and stuff, we had the right idea. As I said, we felt a little embarrassed with the vans, but now you have the light rail, and you're trying to plan communities that make sense. And you're also trying to make communities that, when I was treating my patients that were all overweight at the pain center and put them on 1,200 calorie diets, and then there was a Twinkies right across the street, besides some other action in the motels, we couldn't control what they ate. So we would give them a pass on the weekends, and they would go and eat their Twinkies, and they'd come back, and for some reason they didn't lose any weight while they were in the 18-day pain program. But it was all a growing experience, and that was something that was enjoyable, to have the backup of the hospital for our patients, and to realize that there's something more than just giving up pills.
Cash, same question to you.
Well, I think the advice and the lessons that I have learned since we've been in existence are that I believe that we have two large goals. One is to try to assist communities to maintain and better their health. And we've got a lot of programs to do that. We have funding that we can help do that. We have TAP programs to prepare people to do that. But one of the things that I never envisioned when we started this is the impact that we can have with our efforts in policy. And I think that we really have the ability to influence policy. And as long as the organization can remain neutral and discuss policy and convene policymakers and educate policymakers, I personally think that's where we're really going to make our mark. I never would have said that 15 years ago, but I think that's where the mark of SLHI is going to be. And I would encourage that there are two halves to this, and there may be 4 quarters, but my two big halves are preserving and providing health for communities and policy. Help with policy, because we certainly need it.
Fantastic.
I would add to that, we have an independent niche that's available to us, that if we use it correctly, we can continue to be a catalyst for changes throughout the state. We can take the models in Maricopa. Sure, we're focusing here. It makes sense. It's the biggest county, and that's where most of our people are focused. But we have Sherry from Flagstaff now representing Northern Arizona. We certainly have some good contacts down at the University of Arizona. We should spread this to the state. It's for the state of Arizona. And take what we're learning and provide this new information to communities that are interested.
Excellent advice, excellent. Things that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with a future board member, or even in terms of the legacy of the conversion board?
I could start on that. I was thinking of the two things that we have at this board and why people always enjoy being on it. And I would ask every board member to call in once for a board meeting rather than be there. Because when you do that, what happens is, number one, I had a nice conversation with Martha, which is always good, because I didn't get in right away to the meeting. But when I did, and I heard the laughter and the enthusiasm and the excitement, I said to myself, that's camaraderie. That's what it is on this board, between the board members and the staff. And you can't get camaraderie like that in very many places. And it's something that you won't forget, and it's invaluable. And then after almost every retreat, the other thing is, and I'm glad that I ran into Judith Kunkel, because there was a big fight over this too, using the word catalyst. In fact, I don't even think it's in our mission statement now, but I think we ought to put it back in. We are a catalyst. We don't have all the cash that we need, and we may not be able to provide it. We can do bridge grants and startups and things like that. But we can go to Virginia Piper type organizations and Flynn Foundation and say, hey, here's a good idea. And Roger was a master at that. Unfortunately, the behavioral health issue was a little bit bigger than we thought, a little harder to handle with the SARN situation and all that. We tried, but we're making some efforts, and I was happy to hear at the board meeting 2 months ago that Elizabeth is working with a group that wants to work on the stigma of mental health care, because as I've tried to, document, there is a stigma to that still. And it's a challenge for treatment. You think of the Gabby Gifford situation. That's no different. That's the 2000 version of Winnie Ruth Judd. I mean, we have a psychotic patient shoot these people, including her. And then people say, oh, well, what was he doing on the streets? And how come he had a gun? And then we have Pierce Morgan probably losing his position because he was an advocate for gun control. We don't get that. We don't fund our mental health programs here. It's pretty easy to figure out why CPS went under, because you never got funded correctly, and you can't have so many cases and not be able to follow them. And then for some reason, the Access program here took away money of case managers and vouchers to their clients, and they couldn't understand the next year why there was a decrease in the number of follow-up visits at the mental health clinics. It's pretty easy to figure that one out. So you as board members are going to have a camaraderie which is going to be unforgettable. And then you have a chance as with your independent niche to be a catalyst in a very positive way that we never even thought of when we were going through the ins and outs of inpatient and outpatient care.
Excellent. Cash?
I would have two pieces of advice. One is directed toward being selfish, and the other is directed toward not being selfish. As far as being selfish, I have learned, and I would encourage everyone to think about it. I've learned more about problem solving from my experience on this board than I have any other place in my life. A doctor approaches a problem in a certain way, and those physicians on the board will show you how they approach things. Attorneys approach the same problem differently. Housewives approach the same problem differently. People who deal with employees and employee benefits are totally different from the way a doctor approaches the same problem. I have learned so much about different ways to look at the same problem. And most of the time, I have to admit, come up with the same answer, but in many different ways. And from a selfish standpoint, I have learned a whole lot from being on the board and watching the other people on the board. Bob mentioned camaraderie. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think that if you're going to be a member of this board, you are a member of the family. And you have to take your place in the family. And you will mature in the family. And there's no room for black sheep because we're all the same family. And it is a tremendous potential experience, and I just encourage everyone to make it the experience that it can be. I think most of us, when we discussed reducing the number of board meetings because they're difficult to get to, were disappointed. I didn't want to have fewer board meetings. Yes, I didn't have as much work to do, but I wanted to go to all those board meetings. They were important to me, and I think I was part of the family. Welcome to my family.
And that family included going through the stages of maturation. You know, we started out as children not knowing what the heck we were doing. We had an adolescent phase where we would fight over everything. And, excuse me, eventually I think we matured to the point that we were able to handle conflict resolution in a way that I agree with you. I was supposed to be trained in that somewhat too. I had never seen. It was just amazing how we would come to a consensus, but we did it, and we did it not just with doctors, but lawyers and bankers and people that you'd never think would even talk to each other, and sometimes they didn't. But that was part of the growing process, and I think we're a mature organization now, and I'm sure this will be cut, but I remember when Elizabeth, when I heard that there was a second candidate that we were interviewing for Suzanne's position, I said to myself, wait a second, there's nobody that's better for the job than Suzanne. So I'm going to go down and see who this person is. And I did come here and was here for one of his interviews. And I said to myself, you know what, this guy is basically a lumberjack at heart, I think. And number two, he doesn't hold a candle, which I already knew. And Suzanne is perfect for the job and has already shown that in many ways. I like her op-eds and stuff. And I think we finally have made peace with St. Joe's. At one time, by the way, St. Luke's and St. Joe's were thinking of merging. And we had a conference at Wickenburg. And Andy Laird, the orthopedic surgeon, flew out this hotshot hospital administrator in his own helicopter for this meeting. And of course, it fell through eventually, and she never came on board. But now it doesn't matter. I'm the last St. Luke's physician on the board, at least at this time. But that doesn't matter. We have a Banner physician. We have St. Joe's physician.
I think each of them are relevant questions. I think I think they're each relevant questions, frankly.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do that, because I know we got to get you out of here. Thinking back to those days of chaos, what are your remembrances of the conversion? How did it come to be? And
Well, the specific reasons have been articulated well by others and archived in the records, but essentially, I think SLHI, or then the hospital system, had a economic model that was just not sustainable. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Among them, the financial economics of the institution. There was a tremendous sea change occurring in the hospital industry generally. And the organization, I think, benefited from the fact that there was a kind of a collision or a conjunction of those factors that occurred around some extraordinarily strong leadership on the board and the staff that examined possibilities. They examined everything from merger to acquisition to bankruptcy to selling off business units or something else. And it was the discussion around that something else, as difficult as it was, difficult because it was leaving behind everything we knew, respected, cherished, and culturally were connected to something we knew nothing about. And it was in those conversations around conversion that there was a tremendous amount of intellectual openness to what the future of the institution could look like. And it was in those conversations that I personally found, and I think the other trustees found, the most stimulating sense of the future.
So you hit on a really key term, that there was so much that this board, as the hospital, was culturally connected to.
Right.
What components of that created St. Luke's Health Initiatives, or St. Luke's Charitable Health Trust, and then later St. Luke's Health Initiatives?
You know, Cash, you may agree or disagree, but I think it was, I would describe it as the concept of stewardship. I think the board members in the hospital system, excuse me, the board members of the hospital system each came to their role as with a particular kind of background. But they all had in common this sense of stewardship for a legacy of care, care among the underserved, excuse me, the underserved and the underprivileged, and providing accessibility to care for those populations dating back to the origination of the institution. And as we began the conversion, I think the single most important factor that informed who we were and how we went about our work was this notion of keeping faith with the past by looking to the possibilities of the future, the moderating influence being this sense of stewardship for what we believed was critical, and that was service to community.
So you wouldn't be the first person to say that those days were a little bit dark. But throughout those days, I'm sure there were moments that might strike you in retrospect as a little bit funny.
Yes, there were more than a few. Some of them not to be repeated here. Some of them really of interesting value, I think. And I think all of the board members at that time would remember vans. We were, as an institution, early in our conversion, we were all about vans. I mean, if the grant had any mention of the word, grant request had any mention of the word van in it, we were all over it. We were going to make that grant. Until one day, a respected trustee touted a grant to an organization essentially called Native Seeds, as I remember, in southeastern Arizona, to which the collective response of the trustees was, huh? This is not vans. I mean, we as trustees had come from an environment in which we were immersed in all of the excellent things of hospital care, technical treatments and surgeries and so forth. And suddenly we were literally talking about roots, native seeds. Ultimately, that grant was approved, and I think the most compelling argument in favor of it was, what the heck? And yet I look back on that today and think it was one of those representative discussions that began to open the board's eyes toward a discussion around a more encompassing definition of health and what it consisted of. And this was part of that discussion.
So when people ask me about the history, obviously I wasn't there, but I always say, you know, at some point these guys had to figure out how to improve health in the community without having hospital beds. What was that experience like during the early years of the board? When did you kind of hit a tipping point to understanding where you wanted to go with that? Was it the native seeds thing? And then when you got there, where did you go?
Yeah, I can't point, and Cash may have another view of this. I can't point to a single defining moment in which it all became clear. I think what it really amounted to was a series of inquisitive explorations and the willingness to engage in new activities with the assumed risk in those activities without a clear sense of whether it was going to work out or not, that began to inform and advance our, on an incremental basis, inform and advance our understanding about where to point the sharp end of that spear for maximum effect. I always have thought of it as a learning organization. I think the board the trustees each learn from one another as a result of mutual respect and a recognition of leadership from their various backgrounds. And I think the staff were seen as peers with the board in partnership to kind of examining, exploring, and understanding how, as times change, we should change and focus our emphasis for greatest impact. So I think it was the experience of a learning organization that advanced our agenda, if you will, rather than a single point or series of points that informed as to how to be different.
So the last of the original conversion board members rolls off this year. You're sitting now with a bunch of new board members or incoming board members. What would you say? What would be the key concepts, key words, key points of advice that you would give so that you could see that this organization was still working within its legacy and yet still pushing for the future?
Probably three concepts. I do believe that the board should continue to focus not on constituents, but on concepts. I think the board should focus on leadership, not on representation. And I think the board should always lead with questions, not with answers. It is that notion of willful exploration and assuming we don't know the answers that ultimately leads to change and the opportunity to refocus one's efforts. Those would be my sense of the cultural heritage that the current board can benefit from.
Cash?
I don't know that I could have put it any more eloquently than that. I think that the one comment that I would have about how the board transformed was there were a number of discussions that we had early about we are paying for medical care for patients who were being treated in the hospital. It was obvious that that was good, but there is a never-ending source of patients and a rapidly progressing end of financial support. We also, on more than one occasion, said, can't we do something more than vans? Vans are excellent, but isn't there something else that we should do? And I think that for the future, that's where leadership really came in. And our leader led us to places that I'm sure, certainly I never would have conceived going. And so that leadership from members of the board and leadership that the board has selected are vital in how you get from here to wherever we're going.
Fantastic. Chip, it is after 11 already, but I just would ask you one more question. What else haven't we asked you that you'd like to share either to your fellow conversion board members or to incoming board members?
Well, I think Cash talked about or touched on the most critical element. It is leadership, and leadership does not only mean an official leadership position on the board. It means the leadership of thought, of reflection, of learning, of those elements that all of us on the board bring to our deliberations in the discussions of any particular topic. And one of the things that I so respect and admire both the legacy board and the current board for is that willingness to exhibit leadership at the individual level, what I think of as servant leadership that is irrespective of elected or nominated position, but is one of responsible expression of one's own intellect, one's own judgment, one's own sense of the future that informs then each of their associate board members in a very positive, productive way.
I could eat it up with a fork. That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
I don't think they need to hear the Applewhite family history.
No, but they need to know that you know a lot about the history of Arizona.
Yeah, well, so.
Yeah.
That's important. That's important. So, Bob, let's talk about those days.
Those days.
Those days when the hospital, when you were sitting on the hospital board and it was conversion time. So, kind of what are your key top remembrances of those days? How did it happen? How did it feel? How did it come to be that this organization was created?
Well, I think one has to go back to the time, I guess, in the late 80s, early 90s, when the hospital was, and we all knew it on the board, was struggling financially, and and we started wandering around the world trying to see if we could make a partnership with another hospital. We didn't, it's like we don't want to sell, but we need help. And so we talked to, everybody. And finally, we had a relationship with St. Joe's where they said, well, we might be interested in either taking you on or working out some mutually satisfactory partnership. And of course, we were the little guy and they were the big guy. And they then said that they felt that we needed some different management, and Bill Murray his name came up, and they recommended that we take on Bill to manage the operations. And Bill came in basically as a representative of St. Joe's. And we started down that path. Bill was, I never saw a guy work as hard as he did. It was just incredible. We had a lot of problems. And then we took on some new board members, and several of those new board members, unnamed, basically wanted us to cash it in, throw in the towel and
Mainly bankers, weren't they?
And they were. I'm glad you said that. I said unnamed bankers.
And I'm not giving names.
Yeah, we won't give any names.
But we were surrounded by bankers.
Yeah, and they just said, toss it in. It's all over. And some of us, said, we're going to stay with it, fight on. And we got to a point, I remember several things, and I think this was around 90. Boy, we were talking about this the other day about
Right.
what the dates were, but around 92, we had Carolyn Durkin came to me one day and said, you've had 52 board meetings and executive committee meetings in the last year. That means you sort of met yourself going out the door when you were there. It was incredible. Anyway, we got to a point one day, we were in an executive committee meeting, and we'd been given, the board had given us authorization to do what we needed to do. We had failed to make the bond, in a bond issue, there's a separate fund that is drawn on to make the bond payments. And then you reimburse that fund. Well, what happened is that they drew out the payment for the bonds that was due, I think, semi-annually. And we failed to make, well, we didn't have the money to reimburse the reserve fund. And the Valley Bank was the trustee of that. And they basically, and they were operating under a trustee's agreement. And they basically, and Bill was talking to them, and they basically said, you know, we have the right to take on all your bank accounts, which would have done us in. So I remember the morning so well. We were sitting about 7 o'clock in the morning in the boardroom, and Bill came, and we're sitting there, and Bill said, well, it looks like the bank's going to take our bank accounts. If that starts to happen, the only thing we can do is declare bankruptcy and to stop the whole process. So we all voted to give Bill the authorization that day to file for bankruptcy. And so we all walked out the door, and Bill said, I'll let you know what happens. Well, the bank, wisely so, decided not to attach the bank accounts and to sort of like give you a little breathing room to see what happened. And the amazing thing is when we sold the hospital 4 years later, for over $100 million. About 3 months after that famous morning, we made the payment into the reserve fund. And then 4 years later, we had over $30 million in the bank. I mean, Bill had just engineered through, and this was, you know, developing all sorts of programs to tie into all of the what am I trying to say?
Well, wasn't there-
HMO.
Yeah, HMO. And
We had an HMO.
Medicare, and then he makes
And
some
Medicare
yeah.
and tying very closely into all those programs, we suddenly, you know, came out the other end. Just, it was remarkable. We were the turnaround hospital of the year for American Hospital
And
magazine.
And
or
wasn't he the turnaround hospital person of the
yeah,
year?
person, yeah, CEO of the year.
CEO of the year.
And so, and you know, a lot of board members were in there tussling away, you know, backing him up. Martha and David Zacharias, Bill Baker, and you know, all there are 6 or 8 of us who were on the executive committee, and we just hung in there. And Cash Beechler was significantly important because he kept the medical staff from bolting. And he wrote some famous letters, I wish I knew where those were, to the medical staff, keeping everybody on board. It was remarkable. Anyway, it was a scary time, and of course St. Luke's was such an institution in the community, you know, and if it was like, how could St. Luke's go bankrupt, you know, sort of thing. But we were in bad shape. And
So all those people that you just named, almost every single one of them, ended up on the St. Luke's Charitable Health Trust Board after the conversion.
right.
Could you?
Well, we remained on the board. The corporation, we sold the assets
Right,
of the
you're
hospital,
right.
so the board itself just went on. You know.
Right.
Shifted.
Over to the trust.
Right.
So you come out of these dark days and this incredible string of experiences over a number of years, and now you still have the same mission, but you don't have the physical facilities to do so, to achieve that mission. What about your experiences as a board during that conversion informed what you did next, and how did you find your way to next?
Well, when things started to look good, and two things that happened, and I'm not quite sure of this. I think Martha would have a much better handle on this, but basically, there were a number of groups out there wanting to get in the hospital business. And so they were looking, where can we buy a hospital when we can do that? So we started sort of saying, what should we do? Can we survive? See, we were still in a mode like, yeah, we survived, and look where we are, but can we continue to survive? We are a very little teeny part of the hospital market in Maricopa County. And so how are we going to do battle with the big guys? How can we maintain our niche? And some of us finally said, and some didn't want to do it, but, if we have the opportunity, maybe we ought to sell. And so Wall Street came to us with some ideas. And so we thought, well, let's run down this road and just see where we go. And we received some very interesting proposals. And the Orinda outfit from, I think these people were basically part of the
Nashville, was it?
Nashville, yeah.
Right,
Part of the old HCA group,
right.
spin-off from that. The Wall Street guys brought us this proposal, and then as Wall Street then has tentacles that get into everything, then you have to hire someone in Wall Street to tell you that the proposal you're getting is a fair proposal. And so we went through all of that machinations and decided finally that we felt that was the best we could do for the community. We still felt that the potential of serious financial problems down the road was still real. How are we going to compete? We still didn't have enough capital. We were really worried about our capital base. And so we decided that probably the best alternative and the best for the community would be to sell the assets, take that money, and then put it. We had about $17 million in our foundation, and to put all that money together, we could really do something good. So we went through the process, said we're going to do it, and some people didn't like it. There were some people tied to the institution of St. Luke's, and so this was not the right thing to do. We were in a healthcare business, and then some of us argued, well, there are a lot of different ways to be in the healthcare business. You don't have to be running a hospital. And that argument followed us for a number of years afterwards.
And you are a hospital administrator, or did a lot of work in the hospitals, didn't you? Or as a consultant?
No.
I thought you were.
No,
Okay.
I was always a volunteer.
A volunteer, okay.
Strictly a volunteer. I mean, I got very involved. I was on the board of the Arizona Hospital Association and everything else.
That's what it was, yeah, okay.
But,
So how does one go from being a hospital treating patients to being a catalyst for community health?
Good luck.
good luck. I think it was, and maybe people will argue with me on this, but I think it was just look at the economics. Look at where, can we do it? Can we survive? And where would we get the capital we needed to really underpin us? Give us the foundation to continue. And
now you've sold the hospital.
Pardon me?
Now we're at the point where you've made that decision.
Yeah,
You sold
right.
the hospital. The proceeds from the sale are in the foundation.
They're in
Sitting on
they're in the
$100+
bank.
million.
Yeah. Well,
What do we do now?
Yeah.
How did you go from that moment to where we are today?
Yeah, the sales price, we had a lot of debt, so on the net we got out of the sale was about 55 million. And then we got some more money because we had to settle up with Medicare. That took over 3 years to do that settlement. And we ended up getting like $3 million, another $3 million out of that. Plus we had the 17. So when you put it all together, we ended up with about 75 million. And I remember then going to a board meeting. There we are. All of a sudden we got money, you know. We don't have to go make money anymore. We can figure out how to give it away. And so and I think David Zacharias had a lot to do with this. We decided that we would do nothing for a year. Just let the money sit in the bank, earn money, you know, invest it. We had to set up a whole investment operation. Judith Kunkel did a lot of work on that, helping us get down that road. And go out and hire an executive director and figure out how to be a foundation. We didn't have a clue. What do? We don't know what to do. We don't know how to run this as a foundation. So we sat there for a year, hired Roger Hughes, and started, you know, getting consultants in and tell you what you should do or shouldn't do. And after a year, I always remember the board meeting, we were at our offices then up on 44th Street in Thomas, north there. And the very first grant we approved was for a bus for St. Joseph's Hospital's programs for running indigent care in South Phoenix. And we always...
A bus or a van?
No, I thought it was a bus.
We may have bought a bus, too.
I think it was a bus. I don't know. It was
had all this
something
money.
to,
Yeah.
van, bus, you know, it was a healthcare vehicle to take, you know, services to South Phoenix. And everybody just shook their head, you know, like, we're buying a bus or van for St. Joseph? Really?
Right.
And it was hysterical. And so that started us down the grant road. You know, we basically started out as a grant-making organization, and we had quite an elaborate setup and committees and how you went through the approval process and you know, and basically what we were was Roger, Carolyn Durkin, and there was a young gal, escapes me. There were about 3 employees, and trying to get this whole thing put together, worry about the investments, how to manage the investments. And but then fortunately Roger went out and hired Jane Pearson, and that really stabilized our whole effort of how we were going to march forward. And her contacts were incredible. And so then we started down the road of grant making. And of course, as we all know, we slowly evolved into being an operating foundation. In other words, we went out of the grant business slowly and started doing our own deals, and which I thought was terrific. A lot of people fought that. There were board members who felt that healthcare was delivering services in a hospital or a clinic. That's healthcare. Worrying about how wide a sidewalk is or many other issues, that's not healthcare.
Right.
And
Nutrition, transportation.
All of the things that, you know, lifestyle changes, and it was
Active living.
active living. And
You remember anything funny about that? One of the questions Suzanne sent to us was, is there anything humorous from those days? I had a hard time doing that. In fact, I didn't really come up with anything humorous, except maybe that we bought St. Joe's something, but that wasn't really humorous. There was terrible strife over that.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were St. Luke's Health Trust, I think, at that time.
St. Luke's Health Trust.
Yeah, and then do you remember when we went through the name thing to initiatives, didn't we want to drop, some of the board members wanted to drop St. Luke's from our name?
Yeah, there was a big issue
I
about
forgot
that.
why, though. Why were we doing that? So we would be more attractive to all the other people?
Well, one of the things I think is, I remember, Roger, you saying, I'm tired of getting these telephone calls,
Right.
calling, well, where's your hospital?
Oh, yeah.
And you say, we aren't trying to explain to the world,
Yeah.
we're not a hospital.
That was funny. Roger would get emergency room calls. Is this St. Luke's emergency?
Yeah, right.
That's what, okay, that's a little funny.
That's,
You still get them? Well, maybe we
Still
should have
get 'em.
changed it.
Not as often as we used to, but we still do.
but, on the flip side, that some of the board members, I was always thinking we were on the right path. Roger was taking us down the right path. But some didn't think that at all. And so they felt, the hospital and the name St. Luke's was such an integral part of the fabric of our community that, we ought to be running a hospital, or giving our money. In other words, we sold it, so we ought to take our money and give it to people who provide care. And as many of us kept saying, if you do that, our money will be gone in 6 months. You think $100 million is going to last very long in the healthcare world? Wake up. It would just be gone. Well, they didn't, all right, give it away. No.
Then we would have been out of existence.
Exactly.
There wouldn't be a trust.
Would be a trust, so.
So, it was a great point. It's a great point, a great moment. And I think that, there are two things this video is going to be used for. One is for the board conversion commemoration dinner. But the other one that I think is really important is for both the general public and for future incoming board members to get a sense of the culture that created this organization, that evolved this organization. This organization's come so far in a very short period of time under your leadership that it's almost hard to see the tracks. So
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So it's important that we, the public, even incoming staff, but future board members understand sort of the key guiding principles and the culture of the conversion board. So can you kind of can you think back on that experience and that evolution and talk about the key cultural touchstones that kept you guys on track? The ones that you want to seek to especially.
Well, we all had a very personal, what do I want to say, attachment, I guess is a good word, to St. Luke's. We felt very strongly about that, and the Board of Visitors, and all of the history of the hospital going back to 1905, when we were a tuberculosis sanitarium. And so and that had run through this community for many years. Many of the community leaders, the Rosenzweigs, Goldwater, and a lot of other people had been involved with St. Luke's. And so there was that, attachment, if you will. And I think as we went down this road, we didn't want to lose that attachment and what that meant, and the caring and the giving to the community and taking care of people in need. But on the other hand, it's like, I guess I look at it, and some of us did, this is a business, and we have to run it as a business, and we have to survive as a business. And if we don't run it that way, we're not going to survive. And we didn't. For a long time, we made a lot of very stupid decisions, and we got into a lot of things we shouldn't have gotten into, and we lost a lot of money in things. And it finally, dawned on everybody, say, hey, we got to get back to the, to core principles here and run this thing as a tight ship and run it as a business and, make sure that we survive.
So what were those core principles? What would you point to?
Oh, it's, as you run any business, you have to keep your mind's eye on the expenses. You have to keep trying to increase your income. That's the basic thing in a business. and you have to market yourselves better. We realized we were a very little player in this game. You know, for a long time, one of the things that needs to maybe go back here a little bit. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was what was called Certificate of Need, which was a program, in effect, that if you were going to run a service that I think you had to, over $100,000 or something investment,
For a certificate.
you had to qualify for a Certificate of Need. And we had a franchise in open heart surgeries. We were it. And so that was a big dollar generator for us. We also had some franchises in orthopedics. And of course, we had the behavioral hospital. So we had some niche plays there that were producing income. And and that was a critical, and part of the reason we got our problems started to mount was the Certificate of Need went away, so we no longer had a franchise in open heart surgery, and that everybody else got into that business, and so we lost a lot of our revenue, and we kept some of the orthopedic work, but there again, a lot of that went away too. But the big thing was the open heart surgery, because that was a big driver for us economically.
Dr. Posner, picking up your thumbs on the cup.
You're kidding.
Got happy hands, my friend.
Happy hands.
So going to the St. Luke's board, what key components and principles and core beliefs and culture do you want to be sure that people understand, especially for those who are coming onto the board or for those who are encountering the organization for the first time? You guys have left a significant legacy, but what fed into that? What were the cultural...
At one time, I remember Brad Lockwood, who was the CEO. You know, you're always trying to think of things, what should we be doing? And he came up with this thing that we care. We care. So we all had buttons. Do you remember those, Bob? We all had buttons that said, we care. I don't know why we had to tell people we care, but anyway, we were trying to convince ourselves that we care. And I think we were always interested in the quality of our services. That was something the board discussed a lot, and we tracked very closely, was that we were delivering first-rate quality care, that our physicians were first-rate, and our staff was first-rate.
And those principles came into SLHI as well.
Right. That
What
was
other ones came into
critical.
St. Luke's?
Well, we felt we had something unique, and we did. There was no other setup where you could have a subspecialty medical hospital with a behavioral health unit as far as backup for both ways. We provided consultation liaison to the tower, which was a great service. They provided medical backup for us. There weren't many models like that, but we were committed to that.
So how did those experiences feed into what became this organization?
Well, we were committed, I think, to pursuing what we did, but also expanding our horizons, I guess, is what it turned out to be. I mean, where could you get? I had a schizophrenic patient flown to me from Yuma when I was on call, Hispanic, didn't speak English, called the interpreter in. The interpreter says, I don't understand this Spanish. And I said, well, she's schizophrenic, and I guess nobody understands her. but we got to call an orthopedic surgeon. She fell and broke her elbow. And so Howard Johnston was on call, and he came to the ER where I was interviewing the patient, not on the behavioral health side, but on the hospital side. And he walked in, and as only Howard can do, he says, "Don't worry, I'll take charge here. I'll take care of your elbow." I don't think she understood one word of that. But he exuded this confidence, and we had this backup, mutual backup. And he took her to surgery, and he repaired her arm. And then afterwards, I got paged by him, and he said, "I did my part. Would you please put her on adult psych overnight, because I don't think the nurses in the tower are going to be able to handle
To take care.
the psychotic patient." I said, "Thank God you bailed me out. Absolutely, we'll put her in there. We'll put her in our ICU." And we did. And the nurses, you always get nervous on what you don't do well. If you bleed, then it makes you nervous in psychiatry. And if you go psychotic, it makes you nervous on the medical side. But we put her into the ICU, and the next day we flew her home to Yuma. Where can you get that? We were committed to that model. Yeah, it was mainly hospital-based, but could we take that model? And we're doing that right now as we go into community health. Some of these, what do they call them, health houses now? Or excuse me?
Medical homes?
Medical homes. What are they? Well, they happen to have primary care doctors and behavioral health specialists. Good Lord, ask Elizabeth. She was with Thomas Davis Clinic and in her group in the past. And we used to, and I was medical director at that time at Thomas Davis for psychiatry, we used to put behavioral health specialists in their clinics. And we were available to the primary care to help them with their psychotropics. And they were available to us if our patients develop medical problems. So we took that hospital concept and just transferred it. And now that's a big, as you know, a big force in providing care on an outpatient basis. Ambulatory care. When I was in the public health service during the Vietnam War, I was assigned here to Medicare in Arlington, Virginia. And my first assignment that was given to me was, there's a concept of surgery center in Phoenix. There's a Dr. Wallace Reed, and he had an associate, and they want to do major anesthesia and minor surgery in that. And we want you to check that out. And I just started the public health service. So I made my calls around to wherever I could find supposed experts in that, although it's sort of a new concept. And most people were favorable to it. I would hear things like, "You know what, you're going to take away the bread and butter patients from the hospitals, and they're going to go under, and take all the easy ones, and that's not going to work." And I said, "Well, look, if it can be done on an outpatient basis with an anesthesiologist there, and they say it's okay, and if money can be saved, why not?" So I wrote up my report, took it to my supervisor, who was extremely bright but a non-physician, and she nixed it. She said, "We can't do this. It's going to just kill the hospitals." And so Wallace Reed didn't seem to be a wallflower. He appealed then, and then went up to the director of my unit, Dr. John Cashman, I still remember his name, and he reversed her. He said, "It's a good clinical concept. We have to go with it." And what we did when he reversed her meant they had Medicare approval. Now think about that. Where are half the orthopedic surgeries going on now? They're not going on in the hospitals.
Right, yeah.
Even some cardiac procedures, they're not going on there.
Yep. So,
Well, run down another, I was thinking about when Roger came on board and, the first few board meetings, and we had all heard the horror stories about foundations getting overstaffed, getting big overhead, being all of a sudden the community becomes, they're saying, "What are you doing over there?" So I remember, Roger being cautioned by the board that, be very careful about adding any staff here. Well, there were 2 people. But I think what that led to is, obviously, we had to add staff. But what that led to is that, I think from Roger's perspective, is that the staff we added were the top of the line. And that became a really
Right.
critical
Absolutely.
point for us. And so everybody that came on board here was absolutely top of the line. And that was what made it work. And the staff never really got too big. And of course, I'm the one to say the staff is as big as you need to do the programs you're trying to do. But on the other hand, that works pretty well when you can get, it's like the symphony orchestra, you get either New York or Albuquerque. So, not that I.
Well, not Albuquerque, they're having some police.
No, they're having some problems
But
now.
Elizabeth and Jane were crackerjacks.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They really were. And Elizabeth, as I said, was at Thomas Davis before, and then she came here. And I have a feeling she could have retired years ago, but probably would have gone bonkers because she just likes to do things, and she was so good at it. Yeah. And Jane had so many contacts. And Lee Hunter had contacts in areas that we didn't. We didn't know about that. And as I said earlier, that the camaraderie between the board and the staff
good
is
point.
what makes this a special organization. And will continue to do so. I mean, you're a pretty good guy, John.
I was going to sort of gloss over that part of it.
I don't understand what you do. And when you tell me I can't call in because I have an analog, to me, I am almost computer illiterate. My wife isn't, though, thank God, so I can get.
I think I'm more illiterate than you are, but
Well,
both
maybe.
of us are at the
But I'm
bottom
just
of the
saying,
barrel.
I mean, we got a great staff.
anyways.
Yeah. Well,
Now, listen, I need to ask Bob. So, this is the year the last of the original board members rolls off. And so, what we really want to make sure we know from you is if you were here when the next board members roll in, what key pieces of advice you would give.
watch this video. Watch these videos.
We got to get it on video first.
Yeah, we got to get it on
Well,
video
give it-
first.
What key pieces of advice?
Well, I think it's, let me approach that from a little different direction. I think the orientation of new board members is a critical issue. And I used to work hard on that at the hospital. Phil Wright, I don't know if you ever knew Phil. He was senior vice president at Motorola, retired. He was on the board for many years. And Phil and I ran the governance committee for many years at St. Luke's. And one of the things I think that we worked on was the process of bringing a new board member on and how you do that. And I think we discovered a number of things. Number one, if you're considering somebody, you need to go to them and say, if you were considered, would you be interested? Because a lot of people end up on boards because they think it's some sort of honorarium. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why I'm here. What am I doing here? Because there's a lot of hard work. If you're going to be diligent on a hospital board, it's stacks of reading and papers and everything else that goes with it. It's incredible. It's a lot of work, and you got to be willing to do that work. But I think, getting to your question, part of the orientation needs to be a historical perspective of what this organization, where it came from. And that's what you're trying to do with these tapings, is that, what is the history of this organization? Where did it come from? What are its values and principles? And I think...
What are its values?
To be good guys, to be the best you can at what you're doing.
And with what we have.
And with what we have. Right. And I think, that's a good point. People look at it like, gee whiz, you got $100 million. Compared to, their CEOs that make 3 times that much in a year. $100 million this day and age is not much. So the question is, how do you leverage that to do much more than the 100 million? We've been good at that, by the way. Very, very good at that. And, but people need to, have that sense. They need to know what you've done, what you've accomplished. So I think board orientation is a very critical issue. And it shouldn't be, let's go have lunch for a half an hour. No.
And you also get your Christmas ham certificate every year, too.
That's the most important
Right,
thing.
you forgot that, but most important value, a catalyst for community health. I mean, you can't do better than that. And just one other thing, Lee Hunter sized up Roy real quickly. She puts down here, adept at many things, also very helpful. I think he'd been here 3 months. But think about that. I mean, for a while there, he was running the show here. And she must have had a preview of the future, because he did a heck of a nice job, as you well know. And this is an example of having good staff and board members that are willing to be creative and to accept changes as they come.
And to accept risk.
Accept some risk.
Some risk.
Right.
I think that.
And to work in a state like Arizona, which is not always the easiest state.
Talk about that, Bob.
To work.
The risk thing seemed to strike a chord with you. What-
Well, I think Roger Hughes taught us that principle, because a lot of times, here again, it's let's make a grant here, give them the money, and we'll be, no, we want, Roger, health on a new key. We need to go look at this and do that. Sometimes you got so confused you didn't know what you were doing. But, and even in grant making, at times we make grants where, the grantee blew up or went away or whatever, and there went your 25,000 or your 50,000.
Well, but Health and New Key, I think, was 250,000,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
right.
Poor Bill Baker almost had a stroke on that one.
Yeah, right.
And he made us promise that this was a one-time deal, and this was never to happen again. And that's a major risk for us to take $1 million, wasn't it? We had 4 Health New Keys, didn't we? I think
Yeah,
we did.
well, we had 4 organizations
Yeah, projects.
that we committed $250,000
Yeah.
each to. But we went through this horrible machination about, well, if we take that $1 million and then we do this extra work with it. Now, if we kept that $1 million and over time the income on that $1 million would ratchet that up. So we went through this horrible, and I kept thinking, wait. That's when we got too attuned to the dollar. And we finally said, this was in celebration of our 10th year. And we wanted to do something special. I was chair then. And
That was special.
it was,
Talk about
I thought
conflict
I was gonna-
resolution, yeah.
Lucky I didn't get, my car blown up in the parking lot or something. I don't know. People were really upset. And,
Talk about conflict resolution, as I said earlier. That
some
was
of
a good instructive period in our lives. Good
lives,
Lord.
right. And of course, once you decided to do it, the argument went away. It was like, I'm not going to worry if the $1 million becomes $1.1 million or $2 million.
But then you had some seller's remorse. You said, oh my God, what have we done here? And, but we never had the big bucks, but we certainly had some great ideas, and we still do.
Yeah.
Great job, guys. Is there anything else?
Oh,
We're running past 12 already.
oh, really?
You're kidding.
Oh my goodness.
Is there anything else that we need to get on camera? He's actually run out of battery on his camera.
Oh, well then,
Good.
good. We
can
broke the
stop.
camera.
We can change the battery and do more if you want, but you feel like you got it?
Oh, I think we got it. Well, I could go on and on and on and on and on.
Terrific job.